The situation in the Middle East is developing rapidly as the anti-imperialist and anti-Zionist struggle reaches new heights. 11 months after the launch of the epic Operation Al-Aqsa Flood by the Palestinian resistance, and also the start of the genocide in Gaza by the Zionist State of Israel, we have now multiple battlefronts open in the region. Gaza, the West Bank, Yemen, Iraq, and of course Lebanon, from where Hezbollah has since October 8 launched powerful attacks against the Zionist occupation of the Sheba farms and in solidarity with the Palestinian people in Gaza. In the recent weeks, Israel has escalated its attacks on Lebanon. In two terrorist attacks, it murdered and wounded thousands of civilians and resistance fighters by exploding pagers and walkie-talkies. It then continued bombing the entire country and assassinated Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah in a cowardly operation. Hezbollah has bravely responded to the attacks with missiles, rockets, infantry fire, and border operations. This week saw important developments. First, Israel declared that it had begun targeted and limited ground operations in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah, using guerrilla tactics, killed 8 soldiers from the elite Israeli forces who tried to enter the country. Iran, for its part, humiliated Israel with Operation True Promise 2 in retaliation for the assassination of important leaders. Minutes before the Iranian response, a martyrdom operation by fighters from the Al-Qassam brigades killed 10 Israelis in Tel Aviv. There is no doubt about it. These are stormy times that mark the new periods of revolutions in the world and the general crisis of imperialism and its lackeys. To discuss and better understand the situation in Lebanon, we are talking today to Esteban Carillo, an Ecuadorian journalist based in Lebanon. Esteban Carillo is head of news at the Cradle, an important front for popular and anti-Zionist journalism. Esteban, thank you so much for joining us. Since we scheduled this interview a few weeks ago, the situation in Lebanon changed dramatically. The first time we talked, the pagers attack hadn't even happened. But before we start talking about Lebanon and Middle East, I'd like to ask you about the Cradle's work. How does the Cradle's journalism work, and what's the importance of doing it?
Well, the Cradle is first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure and to join you. The Cradle, we are independent, fully independent, journalist owned. We answer to no one. We simply seek to expose the reality of West Asia from West Asia. We are based here. We have we give a platform to regional voices. As you said, I am from Ecuador. I have previously worked with Telesur English, and my experience with the work I did there is what brought me here. And my understanding too of what it means to give a platform to the voices that are often silenced, be it in Latin America or be it here in the region, because the approach is the same. And the enemy, what we fight against, as you said, anti-Zionism or anti-imperialism, the struggle it falls along the same lines. It is, in the end, a struggle for our very own survival. And I think that's something that we all really need to take to heart. And it's become beyond apparent with the horrific genocide in Gaza situation here in Lebanon. So this is where the Cradle comes in. And the success we have found was, I don't want to say unexpected, but definitely something that I think larger outlets than us would envy, because the Cradle, we are a very small publication. We have a very small team, and we punch way above our weight. And I don't know if you know that a couple of months ago, they banned us from Meta platforms. It was because of this. It was because all of a sudden, this small little independent outlet that didn't have to answer to anyone was making waves in a way that even larger outlets could only dream of. So that's what we are, and this is what we do, and we will continue to do it until, well, we will just continue to do it, even if they deplatform us from every other place. We will continue to move forward because that is our struggle.
Yeah, this is very important because, as you said, indeed, the Latin America struggle, the Arab people struggle is very, very connected by the anti-imperialist feelings. That is very important to say. And Esteban, it is also important that you mentioned the ban that you suffer from Meta, because I would ask about it. A few weeks ago, the Cradle suffered a censorship from Meta. Cradle was permanently banned from Facebook and Instagram with no previous warning and chance of appeal. The justification was the quote, praise for terrorist organizations. All of this because the Cradle posts, as do a lot of press organizations, we do that too, reports from the resistance organizations from Palestine, Yemen, and Lebanon. So, how do you see this ban? How did it occur? And did it have Israeli involvement? Can you
Oh,
fill us in about that?
100%. For sure, for sure. From the moment the Cradle started, and even I think even before we started making waves, we always know that we had the eye, Big Brother looking over us, because we never toed the line. And when it happened, I took it personally as a badge of honor. Although obviously it's disappointing, right? Because you were talking about countless hours of work. You're talking about so much effort put in by your social media team, by everyone that works at the Cradle. And you're talking about posts that, again, we're a tiny team. In our posts, we're getting millions of views across all platforms. So that was obviously disappointed, but not at all unexpected, because the moment that you decide to stand against the powers that be, the moment that you decide to speak truth to power, that they are going to come for you. And at this point, Israel, since October the 7th, since Operation Al-Aqsa flood, they very quickly lost control of the narrative. The US as well, right? This narrative that Israel is the victim, Israel is living amongst monsters here in this region, that went out the window. Gaza is a an inflection point in history, really, much bigger than many others. This is truly a moment that is going to change things forever, and it already did. And this is one of the reasons why they targeted us. And they come and they say we support terrorism. We I don't know what it means, honestly, when they say we support terrorism, because what we do is just report what our organizations say, what Israeli officials say. Israeli officials are some of the worst people in the world, but they're not dishonest. Israeli officials, they speak what they believe. They say it. They go and say it. Maybe they don't say it when they're on CNN, and maybe they don't say it, when they are on other mainstream networks. But when they're speaking to their own media, when they're speaking inside Israel, they speak what they want to say, and that's what the Cradle will report. So actually, some of the posts that they cited when they took us down, they weren't even, about Hezbollah or Hamas or anything like that. They were about Israeli officials talking about how they want to genocide Palestinians, how they want to erase Lebanon, how they haven't killed enough people, that there shouldn't be a baby left alive. I'm sure your audience and yourself are quite familiar with the rhetoric from Israel, but this is essentially why they targeted us. And we are actually back on Meta under a similar name as before, although, as you said, they told us we couldn't come back, we couldn't use the Cradle name. But at the moment, we are back. We don't expect this to last very long. Like at some point, if we start getting traction again, they're probably going to come back for us, because at the end of the day, they own the playing field, right? If this were a football match, they literally own the playing field. They can decide who can be on it and who cannot. But then again, that is what freedom of speech means in the West. It's a fantasy. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, and it is like you said, it's in the end of the day a badge of honor, because when our enemies attack us, we know that we are on the right path. So it's like here when we get a email or something like that from Zionist organization or a big landowner that was offended by a report. So we were like, okay, it's good journalism after
We're
the end of
doing
the
good
day.
work, exactly.
So, Esteban, I think we can talk about Lebanon now. And since the pagers and the walkie-talkies explosions on September 18th and 19th, the situation changed dramatically. But I think it would be good for the Brazilian audience to recapitulate those days. So, how was the days of the explosions of pagers and walkie-talkies? What did you guys see there, and how was the general reaction?
There's no other way to describe what happened as with the pagers as state terrorism. This was a terrorist attack conducted by the Zionist state of Israel against the civilian population of Lebanon. Because no matter what they want to tell you about, like these pagers were all like Hezbollah fighters and so on or so forth, the reality is that this attack, first of all, was conducted in the middle of the day. We're talking about I think they exploded at 3:30. Well, when we first heard about it, we just heard, explosions. A lot of explosions in the Beirut suburb of Dahie, which is a Hezbollah stronghold, a Shiite neighborhood. So sadly, it's not unexpected. You hear about explosions in Dahie. It's not completely shocking, but then it started to become bigger and bigger, and you started hearing it wasn't hundreds, and then all of a sudden you start hearing, no, it wasn't hundreds, it was thousands. You're talking about, you start hearing the ambulances, and you're hearing about the hospitals being all of a sudden overflowing with people, and you start seeing the images, right? Because now we live in a world in which when something happens, you're gonna see it in a couple of minutes, right? This is also why Gaza has been such a game changer, because they couldn't hide what was happening in Gaza. So when we saw what was happening, well, the culprit was apparent, from the beginning. It was obvious what had happened. But then obviously the information started to come out that these were explosives that were planted inside pagers in an operation that was planned for maybe as long as 15 years ago, right? A very, very long time, a very Machiavellian, really, way of like to try to uh, cause terror in a neighboring country and to hurt your enemy in a way. So like to go back to what I was saying, this was an attack on the civilian population of Lebanon, because these pagers they could have blown up. So one of them could have been on a plane, right, on a plane that was landing in Lebanon, one or taking off. One could have exploded as people were driving, which some of them did, causing larger accidents. One could have exploded in an elevator. But like the circumstances are infinite of what actually could have happened that to make it worse. Not to say that it wasn't one of the worst attacks that not even the Islamic State is capable of doing something this horrific, but the Mossad is, and Israel is. And then it also, of course, raised questions about not just the carelessness, I guess, from the enemy about the civilian population, which is something they already have shown in Gaza. They do not care about anyone's civilian population, but also the security of Hezbollah, right? Like the question of how did this get through? And we don't have the answers to that yet, because then it happened a second day, right? It was the pagers the one day, about 5,000 pagers, and the next day you're talking about walkie-talkies, about hundreds of walkie-talkies that in the same time it happened. It happened 24 hours later, and some of them even blew up during the funerals of the people who died the day before. People lost their hands, people lost their eyes, just horrific injuries. Children died, women died, paramedics died, nurses, doctors. The son of a Lebanese member of parliament, even the Iranian ambassador was hurt in this attack. So just a complete disregard for civilian life, just an attempt to create terror. There's no other way to describe it. This was a terrorist attack. This meant to instill panic in the population. And as you were saying, this is kind of what set off the chain of events. This was part of a larger plan that at this point we know all the steps of, but back then, we could only imagine what was next.
Yes, and it's important to say that, to classify as that, it was a terrorist attack, because Israel was saying that no, it was directly against Hezbollah, and if it was this, it was already a terrorist attack against a Lebanese organization, and end of discussion.
No, Western media was describing it as some daring, like something that should actually be admired.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
But we saw pagers blowing up on supermarkets and on the streets and on a commercial hour, like people were going to work, going back to school, and it's just
horrific. So, it's truly horrific what they did.
Yeah, and Esteban, 10 days after the pagers attack, Israeli killed with dozens of bunker busters bombs the General Secretary of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. What can you tell us about the attack?
Yeah, the attack that killed Nasrallah was kind of like the climax of what this plan, right? That started with the pagers. All of a sudden, after the pager attacks, it became clear that there was an effort to weaken Hezbollah, right? Because they started hitting commanders, mid-level commanders, lower-level commanders, just like non-stop attacks. They started launching airstrikes in the suburb of Dahieh, and just expanding the war. And at the same time, the rhetoric, right? The rhetoric that we need to invade Lebanon. We need to invade Lebanon. One thing before I move on to Nasrallah is just a few hours before the pager attack, it was when the Israeli government met around midnight and officially added, as part of their war goals, to the safe return of the settlers to the north. So essentially, you had Israeli officials green-lighting what was going to come next, starting with the pager attack, all of the airstrikes, all of the escalation. Mm-hmm. So last Friday, it was last Friday. It feels like much. No, I'm sorry. Maybe I have the days wrong. When Nasrallah was killed, it just feels. It feels like over the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we lived over like 2 months. In any case, when Nasrallah was killed, what Israel does is they drop anywhere between 80 and 100 bunker buster bombs of 2,000 pounds each in a very, very small section of Dahieh, destroying completely about 7 apartment buildings. They had intelligence that underneath these buildings, there was a Hezbollah command center. Because, as I said, Dahieh, the suburb of Dahieh, is a Hezbollah stronghold. This is where these leaders live. This is where their families are. This is where they, operate. In Israel, the Mossad is also in a highly populated. The Mossad headquarters, is also in a very populated area of Tel Aviv. Israel builds their military infrastructure, where the intelligence or the defense ministry, etc., in the middle of populated areas. So, before anyone decides to point out that why would Hezbollah have their infrastructure in Dahieh? Well, because Dahieh is theirs, right? Just like Tel Aviv is Israel's, and they make those decisions, right? In whichever side it is. In any case, they dropped this amount of bombs, and they killed Nasrallah. And from what we know, he was killed just by the blunt force trauma, just like the amount, the strength of the strike was such that it reached way underground, because you're talking about a structure that if I'm not mistaken, ran several stories below ground, maybe up to 14, stories below ground. So they killed him like that at a time, mind you, when the UN General Assembly is meeting, just a few hours after Benjamin Netanyahu gives an address in front of the General Assembly. He gives the order for this horrific attack that destroys a large chunk of a highly populated neighborhood of Beirut, from New York, from the hotel of the UN. This is, their disregard for international law. Because no matter what you think about Hassan Nasrallah, just for a moment think, what if Hezbollah had done that? What if Iran, a couple of days ago when they launched their attack, what if Iran had targeted the Mossad headquarters with, tens of thousands of pounds of explosives at the same time with no regard for civilian life. Mind you, in Israel, when they bomb, Israel has bomb shelters. Israel has air raid sirens. They have air defenses. So the people, they go into the shelters, civilian lives are protected. Here, we don't have that. We don't have any of that. And so when Israel launches such an attack, they know they're going to kill civilians. They know they're going to destroy entire neighborhoods, but it's fine, right? I guess it's fine because they're Arabs. And I guess it's fine because they're Muslims. Again, they have shown this in Gaza. They have shown this complete disregard for the life of others. And the death of Nasrallah is also, in my own view, is such a misguided thing to do. And it's something that the colonizer, the colonizing mind, never seems to grasp. That when you kill a leader of the stature of a Hassan Nasrallah, you create a legend. You create a martyr. You give the people something to believe in, something larger than life. All of a sudden, he's no longer a man. He's a legend. And his name carries so much more weight. And also, creates, again, to the idea of the pager attack about creating terror in the minds of Lebanese. Killing Nasrallah, a fixture of Lebanese life for 30 years, a leader, unlike any other leader here in Lebanon, a country whose government is completely ineffective. Right now we are in the middle of a war, and the government hasn't even updated the death toll. The army hasn't even lifted a finger. I mean, to evacuate people, to do work in rescue and evacuation, the army has been working on that. But as far as defense of the land, you cannot expect anything from the Lebanese army or the Lebanese government. So the only thing that keeps these monsters at bay, because there's no other way to describe the Zionist army or the Zionist supporters, both as monsters, is Hezbollah. Just like the only thing keeping them at bay in Gaza or the West Bank is the Palestinian resistance, and so on and so forth, like in any other struggle against oppression that we have seen through history.
And Esteban, how was the people's reaction to Nasrallah's assassination? So you're talking about the how Hezbollah has this capillarity, and Hezbollah does a fundamental role in defending Lebanon. Nasrallah was indeed a legend of resistance, of Lebanese resistance. And how was the reaction of the people to this assassination?
It was absolute shock. It was absolute shock because the man, even in life, he was larger than life. Even in life, he was, like I said, he was a fixture of this country's life for over 30 years. So it was a lot of shock. It was a lot of sadness, obviously. Even because I don't want to paint him as beloved by all the Lebanese. He wasn't. Like anywhere in the world, you're going to find this. But even the people who hated him, even the people who I guess at some point wished him dead, would say this is not the way. He did not deserve this. This is not, and especially at the hands of these monsters, not at all, right? So it was a lot of shock. It was sadness. The funeral still hasn't happened. There's still really the question of whether when is it going to happen? Is it going to be a public thing? Which, on the one hand, it really should be, because we're talking about someone who is a very important figure of Lebanese life. But also, on the other hand, you have to consider that Israel, they have no qualms. They have no qualms about what they will bomb. And if they think that there's another person, or if they feel like they can claim that there's another leader that can be killed during this funeral, you can bet that they're going to hit it. So I'm sure there's a lot of calculations there, in particular about that. So for a few days, I would say that here it was mainly shock. It was mainly shock. But now, as the dust settles, and as Israel is failing in its campaign in the south of Lebanon, it's become fuel. It's become fuel for the fire of fighting for your land, for defending against the invaders. And I guess a sense of melancholy, right? Like a lot of people still think that he's gonna still appear. A lot of people still talk about him as if he's still here, and a lot of people still say, no, he's not dead. He's gonna come out and give a speech, because sometimes the resistance is prone to this type of theatrics. Well, maybe not this type of theatrics, but to some level of theatrics. And so there's people that still hold out hope, but sadly, we know that's simply not the case. That Israel, with its uncomparable intelligence capabilities, was able to discern the moment they would hit, and they chose to do it, and they killed many people when they did it, as they have done throughout the years. And now the Lebanese are, I feel like they're more driven. I feel like they're very, very driven. I feel like the loss of Nasrallah may have backfired on Israel.
And Esteban, another event that is now on height is the invasion of Lebanon, the quote, direction and limited operations by the Zionist army. So on October 3rd, the Zionist state said that it was doing this, quote, limited and direction operations, incursions on southern Lebanon. Hezbollah, in response, said that was not happening. And yesterday, we saw an announcement from Hezbollah that it had killed 8 soldiers from the EGOS unit, elite special force from the Israeli army, in an operation on southern Lebanon. How is the situation right now? Is Israel really doing this limited indirection operations? Did it start? It's limited. How is the situation right now?
It's a very interesting thing what's been happening over the past couple of days, because as you said, on October the 3rd, Israel announces, right, we're going to start the limited ground operation imminently, right? Like we're starting it now. And then it took over a day before any troops actually tried to enter Lebanon, because at first they were just like firing tank shells. And one thing before I go on that is really important to highlight is that between the pager attacks and the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah up to the start of this limited operation, Hezbollah didn't change their strategy. They didn't all of a sudden launch a huge attack on Israel, and they didn't all of a sudden try to, I guess, storm Israeli army positions on the ground. They continued. They continued exactly as they had since October. And why is that? Because they know that the Israeli army cannot take them on in a one-to-one fight. That the moment the Israeli army steps foot on Lebanon, they're going to get shredded to pieces. And that's what's been happening. You mentioned the 8 Israeli army soldiers that have been killed. That figure is the official number from the Israeli military. What Hezbollah is reporting, we're talking about dozens. We're talking about dozens of Israeli soldiers that have already been killed from the moment they stepped foot, about a day after they announced that they had started their ground operation. And you had Western media and you had Gulf media come out and say, oh, Israeli troops are rolling into Lebanon. They weren't. They were waiting. They were too afraid. They were trying to lure out Hezbollah. So when they finally realized this was not going to happen, they decided to enter, and it's not going well for them. It's not going well for them at all. Israeli media is describing the ground invasion as a disaster, because the Israeli army has been fighting a war in Gaza for a year now. Right? We're a few days removed from that, and they haven't achieved any of their military goals in Gaza. Gaza is a territory that is a fraction of the size of Lebanon, is a flat land, and it's been under siege for 2 decades or more at this point. So they have leveled it to the ground, they have destroyed it, they have killed tens of thousands of people, but they have not defeated the resistance. They're not even close to defeating the resistance in Gaza. And now, after that, they turn to the north against a force that is larger, stronger, better prepared, better armed, and just itching for a fight, just waiting for the Israeli enemy to enter their land. They're giving Hezbollah exactly what Hezbollah wants. So this is how it's been going, right? We're hearing about tanks getting blown up, the famous Merkava tanks. They're getting blown to pieces. The Israeli soldiers they're recording heavy losses. As you said, I think the first incursion was by this elite unit of the Israeli army. they had to turn tail almost immediately. And from what we have heard, some of these clashes, including the ones from the Israeli elite unit, they weren't even against elite Hezbollah forces, right? The Radwan unit, as they are known. They were just against regular Hezbollah fighters. So the Israeli army is not prepared for this war, and they know it. They know it. And this is also the reason why, from the moment they were announcing it, they kept talking about it being limited, about it being short, about them not wanting it to last too long. And while Western media is desperate to portray such statements as, well, Israel is showing some signs of not wanting to expand the regional war, the reality is these statements are because they know they cannot take on Hezbollah on the ground, and they can bomb, Beirut, they can bomb Lebanon from north to south. An air force is not going to achieve your military objectives, because remember, the military objective is to push Hezbollah away from the border and to secure the safe return of settlers to the north. That is not going to happen. They are not going to achieve that, and they know it. So I still wonder, what are they going to say when they are finally, I guess, ready to accept that reality? Because the support internally for the war against Lebanon, at the moment, it may be significant, but it's not going to last. Because remember, Israel is suffering economically. Israel is also, the army. Their army is it depends on the reservists, right? On the reserve force. The reserve force of Israel, because Israel has compulsory military service, the reserve force is also the workforce. These are the people that drive your economy, who you are sending to get shredded by Hezbollah. So at some point, something's gotta give. And I also feel that's also one of the reasons why they're really trying, in a very short amount of time, to make Lebanon suffer as much as possible, in hopes that there might be some internal uprising or opposition to Hezbollah. But like I said before, the Lebanese people, they may not like Hezbollah, but I can assure you, they dislike Israel a lot more.
Yes. And Esteban, we also saw the Iranian response called Operation 2 Promise 2. How do you evaluate the response and its possible developments?
I think Iran had no other option. Truly, we waited almost 3 months for this response, right? At some point, it was becoming really a larger question of, is it even going to happen? Remember, Iran, this is a new government. The former president, Ibrahim Raisi, died in very mysterious circumstances that after the Peshawar attack, in my mind, I believe this was a Mossad operation, after seeing, the sophistication that Israel can achieve. Having Raisi killed doesn't, all of a sudden seem too far-fetched of a thing, despite what the official report from the IRGC says. But so Iran, it seemed for a bit with this new government that it might be trying to get some deal from the West, right? They were talking about renewed talks for the nuclear deal, for sanctions relief. They were talking about this sort of stuff, right? Iran is a country that's been under sanctions for 50 years. So honestly, you cannot blame them that much if at some point they consider this. But I think it became obvious, and from the statements that Iranian officials put out, that first of all, the ceasefire in Gaza was never going to happen, and second of all, that the West doesn't really have an interest in removing sanctions from Iran, because they keep adding them. Every 2 weeks you hear about new sanctions from Iran. So the assassination of Nasrallah, the escalation here in Lebanon, really seemed to have finally tipped the scales. I forget if it was the president or the foreign minister who said, we gave them being the West, we gave them 3 months to reach a ceasefire in Gaza, and they did not do it. They could not achieve it, despite the fact that the Palestinian resistance in Gaza has been, for months now, since the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, and honestly even before, been saying that they are willing to do a ceasefire under the terms that were presented to them by the United States in July, by President Joe Biden in July, and that it was Israel, the party that was not accepting these terms, because what Israel wants is anything but a ceasefire, which has also become apparent. So when you take all of these things together in hindsight, Iran had no other choice. And I think it was a very impressive display of not, an impressive display of power, but also an impressive display of restraint, I would say. Because Iran did something very smart. They launched their attack in waves. Remember what happened in April, right? When Iran launches their very first attack against Israel. And they essentially give them 6 hours notice, or even 3 days, I think, because I remember like 3 days before, some officials were already talking about it. And so it was done mainly as an attempt to show that they are capable of doing this, but not to actually hit anything that might spark a regional war. Because I think Iran is really attempting not to expand this conflict, but at some point, you really need to hit back against the bully. I believe that's what happened this week with the Iranian retaliation. You saw that many bases were hit. Today, there were satellite images finally coming out showing the extent of one of these air bases, the Nevatim air base, which is, it may have been the one where the attack that killed Hassan Nasrallah was launched from. So they hit that. They hit even the Netzarim corridor inside Gaza, this east to west land corridor that Israel built earlier this year to separate the north of the south of Gaza, so to prevent Palestinians from returning. They even hit that. You didn't hear about any casualties in Israel, right? I mean, the army, I have no doubt, recorded casualties, but just like the U.S. Army, it seems like the Israeli army is, made of steel. These people don't die. They may only die of old age, I guess, or when they face a Hezbollah fighter head on. But other than that, they never seem to die. So that, I take with a grain of salt those claims. But as far as civilian casualties, there were none. There were, like, if there were injuries, it was because people were trampling each other or tripping over themselves trying to get to bomb shelters. So that's what I mean by restraint, right? Because we really need to differentiate the approaches that the Islamic Republic takes, or even Hezbollah, or even the Iraqi resistance, and to some extent the Yemeni resistance as well, in targeting only military sites or just intelligence sites, strategic targets, vital targets. They don't want to go and kill, 110,000 Israelis. We haven't seen that, right? And it's not just because Israel has bomb shelters. It's also because the other side are not animals. They're not beasts that want and go and just kill babies and kill mothers and kill elderly people with no concern for anything else. And so I think that was also something important to take from the Iranian attack, and also, well, their military prowess. Look at what they launched. They launched hundreds of ballistic missiles that took minutes to get to Israel and hit their targets directly. As I said earlier, they launched it in waves, so to overwhelm the Iron Dome. And by overwhelming the Iron Dome, again, another very strategic approach to this, what you do is you hurt Israel and the U.S. economically, because the interceptor missiles from the Iron Dome, from the David Sling, the Arrow something defense system that they have, they're very expensive. You're talking about, batteries that at the cheapest cost $50,000, and in the case of the U.S., they run up to maybe 2 million a piece, and they have to fire dozens, or if not hundreds, of these to try to take down these attacks. Running up a huge tab, at this point between Israel and the U.S., you're talking about billions spent just in repelling the attacks from Iran. So when Iran launches, it's we're going to hit your military targets. We're going to make you spend a lot of money, and then we're going to show the world that we know how to overwhelm your defenses. These defenses that the Iron Dome is something that Ukraine has been asking for like 2 or 3 years at this point. Why would you want something that is so easy to bypass? Well, maybe not easy, but just like that we already know how it can be bypassed, that it has flaws, that it's not infallible, that it's not going to protect you when the time comes. So the Iranian response was really just a huge success, and I also think it kind of breathed a bit of life back into the people of the region, who were starting to feel a bit overwhelmed right, about what's happening here in Lebanon that day when it happened for the first time. You really saw people smiling on the street, after everything that had happened here. To see the enemy, to see, the people committing a genocide. Let's not lose sight of that. These people committing a genocide. They are guilty for the most horrific war crimes, and they have the complete cover of the Western governments, of the EU, of the United States. Not just the cover, but also, they are being funded by them. To see them get hit in a way, to see them be humiliated, I think is the correct word. It gives you a sense of satisfaction, and I think Iran, in all of those things, it succeeded.
Perfect. Esteban, thank you so much for joining us here today. And before finishing our interview, I would like to give you the space to send a final message, final words, whatever you like it.
Well, thank you, first of all. It's been a pleasure. And thank you to everyone who watches. Please make sure to follow the Cradle and, find us on social media. And I think the only thing I would like to say is something that, we said at the beginning, which is that our struggles really are the same. I know I am someone that came from a country that has very limited understanding of the Arab world, or West Asia, or of the struggle of the peoples here. And my time here has been truly a learning experience. But the biggest takeaway of all is how similar our peoples are. Truly, how similar they are in so many ways. I know there's a lot of Islamophobia, a lot of this belief that of the other, of the Muslims, or whatever, and this is what the West teaches us. But the reality is, we are all brothers, we are all sisters, we are all in this together. We're all suffering under the boot of the same enemy, right? They use different strategies. In Latin America, they don't use the same strategies that they use here, but the outcome is the same. The struggle is the same. The oppression is the same. We are still fighting in the year 2024. We're still fighting against colonialism, and we're still fighting against white supremacy, and we're still fighting against the belief that there's people who are better than others, that there's people who deserve life and people who deserve death. And so I think we really need to start to understand that, and to start to question why a group of people is often made to be the enemy, or the terrorist, or the people you need to be afraid of. Why are we being made to be afraid of people who share the same values as us, who share very similar histories to us, and who at the drop of a hat would open up their homes to allow you in if you needed any help? We are in this together, and that's the only way we're going to get out at the end of it all.
Esteban, thank you so much. This was Esteban Carillo, head of news editor for the Cradle. And I thank you all that joined us here today for this interview. I ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also share this video to your friends, families, and whoever you think you'll like it. Thank you so much, and until the next video.
Thank you. Bye-bye.